back to Douglas's point originally, which I think we need to probe more, is this idea that...
Probe away.
Is that this idea that British society, he listed the monarchy, he listed Parliament, that is somehow under threat from people from Eritrea, Ghana and Myanmar. That's not clear to me how that's the case.
It's not the same as somebody from Eritrea or Ghana or Myanmar moving in to live in Salford. It's a totally different movement, and you should admit that.
What's so different about people from Eritrea, Myanmar and Ghana?
My God,
please
you
tell me
can't have gone anywhere.
Specifically.
You can't have gone anywhere if you honestly have to answer that question. So as well as it were, misrepresenting the facts, I think you just have to be extremely careful not to say, this country, which is, as I say, the most tolerant country in the world, is in fact the most bigoted, because if you travel anywhere around the world, you will see a very different...
In a clash that perfectly encapsulates the growing divide over national identity, Douglas Murray takes on an opponent who seems determined to paint Britain in a negative light. The discussion quickly turns to immigration, a subject that has long been at the heart of heated political debates. Watch this video.
I think the whole immigration debate needs to be put in the broader context in which migrants have been consistently scapegoated. So we've seen migrants blamed for low pay, we've seen them blamed for crumbling public services, and what's actually going on, all the evidence shows from the LSE to the OECD that migrants aren't a significant factor in low pay, and that it's underinvestment in our public services that's leading to them to collapse. So I think that there are a number of things going on with people's cultural anxiety. I think that is a real thing. I'm not denying that it is, and we need to look at the other factors alongside immigration. But just to talk about immigration first, I think that the whole immigration debate, it needs to be recognised. Zubaida Haq from the Runnymede Trust has talked about this, that anti-immigration sentiment is not always correlating with the numbers of immigrants in the country. So if you go back to 1978, you will see that when there was net migration was 0, you will see that 70% of people in Britain so that they felt that their culture was being swamped by migrants. So what that tells us is that we need to be recognising that anti-immigration sentiment is very deeply entrenched in this country, and we need to be addressing...
Is it? Because we've had a lot of attitudinal change on many social issues since 1978, which goes against that particular time. So can you compare like with like?
Well, I think that what we can look at is the fact that there has consistently been a hostile environment to migrants. If you look at government policy from the 1960s, there was a concerted effort to keep migrants of colour out of this country. So what I'm saying is not that we should be ignoring people's concerns, what are often deemed legitimate concerns by politicians, but we should be recognising that instead of just calling people racist, we should be addressing why there is prejudice. That's not to say that everyone who is anti-immigration is racist, but it is to recognise that there is an element of racism and an element of prejudice within the anti-migrant feeling, and I think we need to be addressing that, trying to break down difference as opposed to reinforcing those differences, because people all over the world have far more in common than a lot of this discourse would have us believe.
Let's take a step back and examine the historical backdrop of this issue. In the aftermath of World War II, the United Kingdom saw a wave of migration, particularly from Commonwealth nations. The arrival of the Windrush generation in the late 1940s and 1950s signified a new era of demographic change, as people from the Caribbean, South Asia, and Africa arrived to fill labor shortages. Fast forward to the 1970s and 1980s, and the economic landscape began to shift. The decline of traditional industries left many working-class communities struggling, fueling frustration over economic uncertainty. Throughout its history, Britain has continuously debated its national identity. For some, immigration has been framed as a challenge to long-standing cultural values and traditions. The sense of rapid change, particularly in communities experiencing economic difficulties, has contributed to concerns over integration and cultural continuity. In the present day, economic insecurity remains a major factor in shaping public sentiment toward immigration. The forces of globalization have reshaped industries and economies, creating both opportunities and upheavals. While many have benefited from this transformation, others have felt sidelined. This growing divide has led some to view stricter immigration policies as a means of restoring stability and reclaiming a sense of control over their communities and future.
Entirely disagree. I think you would be hard-pushed to find a single country in the world that has been as tolerant and as welcoming of migration as this one. In fact, I cannot think of one anywhere in the world. I've travelled widely, not just on our continent, but across the world, and I can assure you that if the numbers that came into this country over the post-war period up to now had gone into any other country in the world, we would be seeing a very different response. And I think this is a knee-jerk assault on the British people, which is continuing and should stop. We were talking earlier about some of the economic implications. The economic implications of globalization include the possibility that people born in this country, at the same time as somebody in this country has a child, they are competing with dozens of other children around the world to get to the lifestyle benefits that people across the world would dream of and which people in this country think is their birthright. And that's changing. And that's going to change across all sorts of parts of the developed world. And one of the things that makes that change far, far more painful is the idea that it will happen simultaneously with an assault on their identity. Because people can potentially take the stagnation of wages, they can potentially take the living standards questions, but if at the same time you say, oh, and by the way, maybe we don't always say you're racist, but we sort of imply it, then I think you're going to build up a lot of problems for the future. And by the way, very quickly on your 1970s point, one of the things about migration is it takes a long time for that effect to happen. If you look at the opinion polls on migration in this country that followed the influx after the Blair government, it took time for people's attitudes to, as it were, harden on migration, precisely because the impact of that migration takes the time to happen. So as well as it were, misrepresenting the facts, I think you just have to be extremely careful not to say, this country, which is, as I say, the most tolerant country in the world, is in fact the most bigoted, because if you travel anywhere around the world, you will see a very different picture.
Douglas Murray has taken a strong stance against the increasingly common portrayal of Britain as a nation defined by hostility toward immigrants. He argues that such a characterization is misleading and fails to account for historical realities and nuanced public sentiment. Armed with research and historical context, Murray presents a compelling case that Britain's relationship with immigration is far more complex and far more positive than critics often suggest. Looking back at history, Britain has long been a destination for migrants, particularly from Commonwealth nations in the post-war era. The Windrush generation of the 1940s and 1950s played a crucial role in rebuilding the country, contributing to key sectors such as healthcare, public services, and industry. Despite the challenges they faced, these communities became deeply embedded in British society, shaping its culture, economy, and national identity. The economic benefits of immigration are undeniable. The AMES, one of the UK's most cherished institutions, has relied heavily on skilled workers from overseas. A study from University College London further reinforced this point, showing that recent immigrants from the European Economic Area contributed more in taxes than they received in state support, disproving the idea that migration is solely a drain on resources. Culturally, Britain has thrived as a result of its diversity. From music to cuisine, literature to sports, immigration has enriched every aspect of British life. The UK has historically prided itself on being an open, multicultural society where people from all backgrounds can thrive. Compared to many other nations, Britain has maintained a relatively open approach to immigration while upholding legal protections against discrimination. However, Murray is quick to acknowledge that a nation's openness must be balanced with realism. Economic uncertainty, rapid demographic shifts, and concerns over social cohesion are legitimate issues that should not be dismissed. Rather than resorting to inflammatory rhetoric on either side, Britain needs a serious conversation that acknowledges both the benefits and the challenges of immigration. Policies must ensure that integration works, that economic pressures are managed, and that national identity remains strong in the face of change. Ultimately, Murray's argument is a call for reasoned debate. Britain has a proud tradition of welcoming those who contribute to society, but it must also take care to maintain stability and social harmony. Misrepresenting the UK as inherently hostile to immigration does nothing to advance meaningful discussions. It only fuels division. Instead, what's needed is a balanced approach that recognizes both the successes and the difficulties of immigration policy.
I agree with this idea that we're bringing the rest of the world where we're leading. If you look at the history
Are
of the
we leading?
No, if you look at the history of the British Empire, what you'll see is actually a very bloody history.
Now.
But now, I mean, I think that
terms of LGBT, in terms of women?
I think that racial attitudes, actually, if you look at the British Social Attitudes Survey, there is increasing people who say that they are intolerant and do not like people of different races. So that is actually increasing. So I think there's a problem.
There's been an upward blip in a long downward trend. An upward blip because the change has been so radical and rapid.
Well, we can't ignore that. And to come back to Douglas's point originally, which I think we need to probe more, is this idea that...
Probe away.
Is that this idea that British society, he listed the monarchy, he listed Parliament, that is somehow under threat from people from Eritrea, Ghana and Myanmar. That's not clear to me how that's the case. You've listed all these institutions, but you haven't really explained exactly what it is that is under threat from these people.
Quick answer from Douglas, because he has to answer that, because he's had a direct... He's had a direct challenge there, and then Sam, I'm going to come to you, and Linda, I'm going to go Linda first, then Sam, but Douglas, answer that direct challenge from Maya.
You can do it on all sorts of things. You can do it on historical attitudes, or you can do it on, for instance, current social attitudes, which is, I'll throw out as one example. And take an example that Nikki just cited of tolerance. I think we agree in Britain that we're a tolerant country, we're meant to be a tolerant country, we try to be a tolerant country, and so on. There's been polling in recent years that actually shows that the more immigration you have, the less tolerance you have on certain issues, not because we, the British people, have become intolerant, but because people come with views of their own. Let me give you a very quick example. A poll carried out 2 years ago by YouGov asked people their opinions on homosexuality, morally acceptable or morally not acceptable. Across the country as a whole, about 14% of the British people said homosexuality not morally acceptable. In London, it was double that. Why would that be? Is it because London, the capital city, is just a particular home of homophobia? Or might it be, as I would suggest it is, because people come into the country with attitudes of their own? And you may deprecate that, and I deprecate that, but we should at least acknowledge it, and you're trying to cover it over.
No, I think...
Globalization has been one of the defining forces of modern society, bringing technological progress, economic expansion, and greater international connectivity. There is no denying the opportunities it has created. However, for all its benefits, globalization has also left many behind. Industries that once provided stable jobs for working-class communities have been hollowed out due to offshoring, automation, and shifting economic priorities. This has fueled a growing sense of frustration and economic insecurity among those who feel abandoned by policymakers. Similarly, immigration has played a crucial role in shaping Western societies. It has enriched culture, strengthened economies, and reinforced the values of openness and diversity. But dismissing concerns over immigration as unfounded or reactionary ignores the realities on the ground. Douglas Murray acknowledges that immigration can bring economic and cultural benefits, but he insists that it must be managed responsibly. Unchecked immigration, he argues, can place undue strain on public services, depress wages for lower-income workers, and if not handled carefully, lead to social fragmentation. The key is balance, policies that welcome newcomers while ensuring economic stability and social cohesion. The same principle applies to globalization. Greater interconnectedness has propelled economies forward, but it should not come at the expense of domestic workers. When industries are uprooted and sent abroad, entire communities are left struggling. Leaders who blindly champion globalization without addressing its downsides risk alienating the very people they claim to serve. Responsible governance means acknowledging that while global markets bring prosperity, they must also work for those at home, not just for multinational corporations and elites. Murray's approach in this debate exemplifies why measured, fact-based discourse is essential. Rather than resorting to ideological grandstanding, he dismantles simplistic narratives with clear reasoning and hard evidence. His ability to present a rational, structured argument exposes the flaws in extreme positions, leaving his opponent struggling to counter with anything substantial. In the end, this was more than just a debate. It was a wake-up call for those who refuse to engage with the complexities of these pressing issues.